Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Dr. Mark Cucuzzella is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first appearances on Boundless Body Radio on episodes 25, episode 40, and episode 327, of our show. Dr. Mark Cucuzzella is a professor from West Virginia University School of Medicine and a retired Air Force Reserve Lieutenant Colonel. Mark has developed and adopted a protocol for using a low-carbohydrate diet for patients with obesity, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes. Mark is a founding member of the Nutrition Coalition, the Low Carb Action Network, the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, and the Hypoglycemia Foundation. Mark also co-authored guidelines on Guideline Central, low-carbohydrate nutrition approaches in patients with obesity, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes, and the companion patient guide, Low Carb on Any Budget, a low-carb shopping and recipe starter, begin a life free of dieting and indulge yourself in health. His other book, Run for Your Life, How to Run, Walk, and Move Without Pain or Injury and Achieve a Sense of Well-Being and Joy, summarizes the science and the soul of running, nutrition, and physical activity to help you maintain a vigorous life. He owns the running store Two Rivers Treads, which is our favorite place to order our minimalist shoes. You can visit Mark's site at www.drmarksdesk.com. Mark Cucuzzella, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh gosh, it's a privilege. Episode 25, Casey. You're on like almost 600 now. It's crazy. I think we talked about shoes the first time we talked.
We've had some really fun chats. We did a whole episode about feet and footwear, which was fantastic. We did a whole episode about your journey and your work through low carbohydrate nutrition. Our last one was one of my favorites where we talked about compassion in healthcare, which you are the perfect person to talk about as far as that goes. And, I've been really fortunate lately to welcome back some guests that we had in the very beginning and have got to thank them for not only appearing on the show today, but also being some of the very first guests that we have ever had when we didn't have very many listeners and people that said yes, like you and Dr. Schindler and Dr. Bickman and Nina and all these amazing people. So it's just awesome to invite you back and actually really, truly thank you for not only everything you do, but thank you for saying yes to us in the very beginning. We were just getting started.
Well, gosh, I have to pass that gratitude back to you, Casey. I mean, just in the last, if anyone listening to this hasn't gone backwards into your show, listen to Nina, your conversation with Nina on the twins study. And obviously Ben Bickman, you have to listen to that about 3 times. That's a master class. And then, the one that I really appreciated, and gosh, you talk about a compassionate healthcare provider is my VA colleague, Dr. Anna Rosa. So that one maybe too, just go, anyone who's just wants to listen to someone who cares about going to work every day and making the world a better place. I mean, you almost cry when you listen to Anna for what she's been through in life and now she's still and we just communicated today through Teams. And after listening to your podcast, it's like, okay, we need to get a paper out on visceral fat, and what to do about it because she can identify it. And maybe I have some strategies to reverse it. And we're going to get Sean O'Mara, who's former VA radiologist, involved too. So hopefully within a few months, we can get a draft of a paper together, which then takes 6 more months to go through the pipeline. But you have to start somewhere with an idea, and an outline, and something new and different. Right? There's a lot of stuff gets rehashed, but that's a story that needs to be told. So thank you for that one. And so many, Mariella Glant, you interviewed, a month ago, and she and I are partnering on a grant on diabetes remission in West Virginia. So, she's again, her quote, why do you, what are you, what type of doctor? I'm a doctor that tries to make people healthy. It's like, wow, they in medical school, right? There is such a thing. I'm a doctor who tries to make people healthy.
It's such it shouldn't be such a foreign concept.
Or a foreign concept, but no, your art of bringing out just good stories in people is special. And when I go on my morning jogs, I like teeing up someone I've never heard of, right? It's like you had Rod Taylor on the other day. It was really good. And then I'll find some, I know Rod, and then I'll find someone I've never heard of. And I think if you're listening to this, pick a podcast of someone you've never heard of. I think we all tend to go, oh, I know, Gary Taubes or Nina. So you'll but pick someone because you get surprised by people you've never heard of. And that's where you learn something new and novel because you're like, oh, wow, coming at you from a different angle.
Yeah.
Maybe I had a few after this, ones that you think, oh, wow, there's these are like hidden gems, because you could go to like most popular, and then there's probably some hidden gems in there that are like, oh man, everyone you're listening, like every human should hear this. How do I get them to find it? Which wouldn't
Yeah.
be true. I've been enough of these conferences, so it's all right. You've heard the barefoot shoe story. But yeah, we'll go today, maybe we'll think about some new things, right? Something new and interesting, and maybe
I love that.
rest of
Yeah.
the hour.
One of my favorite gem episodes that we did was a long time ago, also with the organizer of the Boston Marathon, where he tells the story of earning the right when he was going to quit after doing a marathon. And remember, he made a promise to his grandpa that he was going to train and earn the right to do it. And his just incredible story, Dave McGillivray, was wonderful. So yeah, we do get some of those gems in there also. They're just amazing stories.
Dave is amazing. I know Dave, and we wrote a blog on Dave. Maybe we could have done 28 Boston marathons. And he has an amazing cardiac story. He probably shared that one. Yeah. So yeah, everyone should go listen. And Dave says this: I was fit but not healthy. Right. So he's like, he thought when the fire was, here's your classic story, Casey. When the fire is hot enough, you can burn everything. And then, he ended up with triple bypass, but he had a little bit of stress. All that started cranking out after 2013, after the bombing. A little Scotia stress right there. But he's still alive and still directs the race. But he got a second chance. He's very grateful. Like, he got that second chance.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, speaking of stress, you gave a presentation at Boca, Low-Carb Boca, which I unfortunately was not able to attend, but I was able to catch the presentation later. You have been working at the VA for a long time. You've been working with veterans for a long time. And part of your presentation was about PTSD, which yours was a bit in the context of, again, more veterans and also, people in law enforcement. But as we're learning more about trauma, PTSD is getting diagnosed so much more now than it has been in the past, and probably for great reasons that we're bringing more awareness to it, but also we're starting to learn a little bit about lifestyle and how that's affecting things. So I'm just curious, observationally, what's the state of the state from where you are as far as you're practicing medicine and you're seeing veterans in particular? Like where are we as far as PTSD and diagnoses and treatments and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a huge, huge topic, but I can kind of give you like a short summary. I've been here, Casey, for about a year, almost a year. I started in March of 2023. And, out in the civilian world, I'm a vet, 29 years in the Air Force, flight doc. So, you know a lot about the military, but I really didn't understand much about what, that true military PTSD trauma was, because I wasn't working with the veterans. I was more on the active duty side. And then on the civilian side, trauma usually it doesn't come up that much. We're probably not asking enough about it. And what we mean by trauma in relation to PTSD, where it might affect your metabolic health, because we know that cortisol, adrenaline, and stress and threat assessment, is connected to metabolic syndrome. Because look at police officers, right? Every day, every minute of their job is threat assessment. I'm not in threat assessment mode here. I'm in my office, but I'm not worried that that trash can has a bomb or something in it. So like I'm not living in that space, but that constantly in that space creates the starters of visceral fat, as we talked about with Anna. So adrenaline, so they get visceral fat because cortisol, adrenaline pump glucose out of the liver, and insulin has to go do its job. And you could do that for a year, 2 years, but over 10, 20 years of a military career, and then you come back and your brain is still in that kind of threat assessment mode. So veterans have 3 times the rate of type 2 diabetes than non-veterans. And you kind of step back and you pause and you're like, wait a minute. This group was once, like my clinic is exclusively post 9/11 combat vets. Right. So these guys weren't just like, okay, these were like the uber well enough to deploy downrange to do combat. So this you take a group of like warriors, perfect human health people. And why do these people all have diabetes? I mean, I expect 3/4 of high school graduates now, because they're pre-diabetic and they don't even know it, right? They're all going to be diabetic in 10 years. No surprise. But when you ask yourself, why did this group who were well, I think kind of the Occam's razor is really understanding the trauma. And I didn't understand that day one, but I started a database. We're studying this here. We're going to see our intervention, which is carbohydrate reduction, basically giving them that simple book, Low Carb on Any Budget, but just educating them on that connection. In my first 6 months, I didn't really see that connection that much in my face until I saw follow-up. right? Because you give people the same information, have a nice 6 months. We don't have coaching programs or, come back in 6 months. If you're struggling, let me know how you're doing. So 85% of people manage to lose weight. And then there's the other 15% who either are sideways or going up. And then you're like pulling out, okay, what's different about this group? And that group is still kind of in that world. Like they get out of military service, Casey, and they become like a law enforcement officer, right? Because these are like alpha males. They don't like boring jobs. They like to be, that's why they join, right? So they're like, and they go right back into that type of work. So like that's, I think, it's like a David Unwin experiment, right? So this is just observational data of what's going on. So that's, took like 9 months of work before I would even think about giving a talk on the topic, because it's all just theory until you see people and you talk to hundreds and hundreds of people. But yeah, so now when I see people in follow-up, I'm very comfortable now talking more about the trauma and the stress for the ones who are struggling. Ones who are doing great, they tend to be through it. They have a job, everything's going pretty good, right? So they may be 10 years remote from the military duty, but people that are a little more acute. But yes, I think we have to deal with both sides, teach them. I mean, these folks can understand low carbohydrate. I haven't met a vegan vet yet, right? If I say, oh man, you got to eat more meat. Oh, that sucks, right? No, these guys love meat. So actually the food part is, do you like meat? And they're like, well, yeah. do you like eggs, fish? Yeah, I mean, they all hunt, right? I mean, I'm in West Virginia. Most people have weapon right in their car, right? To use appropriately. So these folks like the diet, but they're sabotaged by the same stuff that everyone else is, stress. They're going through their second divorce, night shift work, and just that cortisol stress, right? They're still in kind of threat assessment. Yeah, but it gives me hope that, we can help these people, because the financial impact of type 2 diabetes, not just for the Veterans Administration, but for this country, it's an unsustainable financial burden. What was it? $400 billion is the financial cost of diabetes in 2022. People like trying to put well, what's that mean? 400 billion. We play with the national debt all the time with multiple zeros, but our U.S. defense budget is 800 billion. And you're like, whoa. And that's not even the heart disease and the Alzheimer's disease and the liver transplant. That is just the diabetes care. Unsustainable for, the viability of, your kids and my kids' future. So I don't want to be like a sky is falling person, but we have to figure out diabetes. Somewhere around 20% of the VA budget is diabetes care. And 50 years ago, when the VA was established for millions of veterans coming back from World War II, these folks were pretty well, right? Like type 2 diabetes was like, we didn't even know what it was. And, but now, like, if you look at, and all this stuff is public websites, I'm here not to share, like, I'm just sharing stuff that's out there that everyone can look up about, federal health care, veterans, people can look up the cost of diabetes for the country. It's all out there. But, the numbers of veterans in this country are going down. Right? I mean, the World War II generation, every Memorial Day, every, Veterans Day, there's a few World War II vets there. And, that number was in the millions, in the 60s. But the healthcare costs are going up. So we need to figure that out. If we can't figure out diabetes, which might be figuring out how to help the PTSD people more who get the diabetes. So that's my mission now. I've been here a year and I come to work every day with joy, because we have great conversations. You laugh, you don't take this too seriously. And I tell them it's okay to eat meat, and we don't make it fancy or complicated because they're busy. And the other thing I think I learned too, just reinforced it from, reading the literature, about veterans and diabetes and my own practice. And then you see what's happening is people don't want to be overmanaged. Like what happens in most healthcare systems is when someone is, having difficulty or, we want to, manage their care more, more intervention, more coaching, this visit, that visit, see this person, we try to engage them more, join this program, this is going to be your weight loss program, do 24 virtual visits. And most people, when you do that, they kind of like, whoa, like, so we apply what's called minimally disruptive medicine. And that's actually a term from Victor Montoya in the Mayo. And I think the only way to treat diabetes is, how do you make this fit into the context of their life? So if we complicate it too much, they get what's called diabetes distress. And that's like in 2 questions, have you ever been overwhelmed by having to manage your diabetes? And they're like, oh, yeah. have you ever felt guilty about optimally managing your diabetes? And they're like, well, yeah. I mean, and everyone, like today, for example, I saw a veteran hasn't come here because he's burnt out with everything. He comes in today and hasn't been here since 2017, and his A1C is 14.
Oh my goodness.
Whoa, right? And he walks in, you don't even know, right? He looks pretty good, right? But we trained him, gave him 3 things, taught him how to check his sugar, taught him how to inject insulin, gave him the food list. He has my text message. We're going to follow him up tomorrow. So when he left, you feel good about this? It makes sense? Not too complicated? Good with it? Yeah, I'm good with it, Doc. Thank you. Cool. We'll see you tomorrow. So, yeah, I mean, I hope, because I think he's going to be good, right? Because it's like simple, right? The KISS thing. And it's 14, right? Everyone listening to this, oh, that's a problem.
That's a problem. Yeah.
That's a problem. Wow. But not tell him that, but I think he, C-peptide pending. I've seen people like that in a week not be on insulin anymore. Once they kind of blunt that counter-regulatory stress response that his body's in now, you kind of put the fire out a little bit, let beta cells chill a little bit. Who knows, in 2 weeks, he could be good.
That quick.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is. I mean, we see them, right? They come in and they're a mess. And that's not all. It depends on how long they've been diabetic. But some of them, it's like the daily miracles. We follow a lot of them. On my phone, I have the Libre app where you can follow all our CGM patients real time. And some of them will come off 80 to 100 units of insulin, in 2 days, never look back. But those folks aren't in PTSD stress. So they're the good, right? They're just like, I'm in. I don't have a night shift job. I'm not traveling 4 days a week, eating in airports.
Yep. Well, that's awesome.
That kind of sums it. And, I think they'll probably have that presentation posted at some point, on Low Carb Down Under.
Good. That'd be great. Yeah, I certainly learned a lot. And it's interesting. I think we all know at this point the relationship between low carbohydrate diets and type 2 diabetes in particular. I think we've seen way too much out there to not say that you can definitely put type 2 diabetes in remission, probably with most people, if they're willing to try this. Maybe there's some exceptions. I don't see many. You probably don't see many. It's I think we're fairly confident in saying that will work. And it's only been in the last few years that we started to get more and more research on the PTSD and kind of mental health side. We had, Dr. Georgia Ede make her great book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. Dr. Chris Palmer, his amazing book, Brain Energy. Are we learning more about, actually being in a state of ketosis and ketones themselves being neuroprotective and helping with PTSD and other mental, issues that people are having?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's kind of the next frontier. So, I'm dealing more with the diabetes and the medical obesity, really. So BMI, between you and I, Casey, means nothing, right? It's the medical obesity. And we can talk about that later with the drugs. But yeah, so it's not my area of study, but we had a good conversation with a researcher who studies ketones, PTSD, and metabolic health. So that I'm not checking ketones in people. They don't have ketone meters for vets, and I don't want to make it more complicated than it has to be. But most people probably are in some level of ketosis, but I don't think that's never a focus, because I don't want to scare you. This is a keto. I don't want to scare them away, and then they'll go talk to their wife and they say, "Oh, that keto diet is a fad, or it's going to cause keto." I just tell them, "You're eating." I'm like Ken Berry approach, right? This is human diet. Talk to them like a fellow colleague and vet, right? Like, you like meat, right? Oh yeah, this is keep it. You have a local farmer. We're in West Virginia, so we don't really talk about macros. I give them a list, in that Low Carb on Any Budget book. We can link it. Anyone can download it. But here's the green list foods. Basically, it came out of little West Virginia variety of Tim Noakes' Real Meal Revolution. Green list, orange list, red list. And if they stay on the green list, if you want to get out of this quickly, go all in, right? Don't be afraid to go all in. But some people kind of more tiptoe into the water, and some people go all in. But yeah, I think for some of like true measuring ketones, but I think it's another whole area of, we have a lot of stories, right? You had Georgia on the other day. I love Georgia. I've known her for over 10 years, and Chris has, a lot of single patients. But what's great is they're developing, the Metabolic Mind and Bouzouki Foundation. So, we want studies to know who the right patients are. Do they need to be in ketosis? What level? Because there's probably something specific with ketones for mental health that's different than just metabolic health and carbohydrate reduction. I think that's why ketogenic diet was first studied for epilepsy, meaning a true ketogenic diet, meaning that, 4 to 1, right? 4 times fat versus protein, like really high fat. And weight loss, I think if people eat 80% fat and add extra fat to try to get ketones, that's probably not what we want for weight loss. But the kids with seizure disorder, they tend to be underweight, right? So we want them totally, like, the people get these things kind of confused when they try to like apply one thing to another thing that's different. But yeah, all interesting. And I hope we can do some work here, because I think we have a good population that would be ripe to try true ketogenic diet, test the ketones, with a good intervention, follow that.
Yeah.
So maybe talk to me. Yeah, these things take a lot of time. It's no kidding to design any
Yeah.
prospective research versus an
Right.
audit where we're just looking at what's happening.
Well, I appreciate your approach of keeping things a lot more simple and really practical with the people that you're working with. I think, hopefully it's looking very promising that research will be done. The Bouzouki group, but what an amazing family and all the work that they're doing and investing so much into this. I wasn't too hopeful that we would get a lot of research in this field, and it certainly looks like now, just in the last few years, it looks like we actually might. So it's pretty hopeful. On the other side, we also have pharmaceuticals. You mentioned the drugs, and there are a few drugs that have been out on the market for a little while that are very, very hot right now, getting a lot of attention. Most people only know the brand name Ozempic, but there's lots of different types. We hear GLP-1, we hear semaglutide, we hear all these different terms for these amazing, incredible weight loss drugs that everybody's rushing to get onto. I know this is somewhat of a passion of yours. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about these drugs and maybe where you are as far as your thinking around them, around prescribing them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you can even go back to, like, okay, why isn't there more research on ketogenic diets for mental health? Like, who's going to fund that? The Bouzouki Foundation, because their kids got better, right? There's no pharma funding for that. So it's all going to be like grassroots, foundation funding. Right? It's hard, right? So, but back to, yeah, so the latest and greatest drugs for, they're told they're weight loss drugs now. So, like, I was working before this job. My clinic was primarily a diabetes clinic. So maybe 5 years ago, this category of drugs called GLP-1s, came along, which had some satiety effect, because a lot of our type 2 diabetes patients really have a hard relationship with food, and they're on massive doses of insulin. And, when they're on like super therapeutic, 50, 100, 150 units, there's no way out of that because they're just packing. And if we had anything we could do to try to help them dial the insulin down, get better control of their appetite for their severe diabetes, that was a win. So first generations were like liraglutide, so Byetta, and then semaglutide came on board. So once a week was a lot better than once a day, so it's, people don't like taking more and more shots. So semaglutide came on board, and we probably started using this 4 years ago for severe diabetes patients. And they gave before it became a high commodity weight loss drug, the reps would leave samples for us in the clinic. So we, because you started at like 0.25 milligrams a week. And it's like the starter thing is like a 6 week. It's one pen that you have 4 times 0.25, and then you do 0.5, 0.5. And we counsel them on the nausea and the pancreatitis risk and, C-cell thyroid cancer, gut, mostly all GI stuff. And, you'd work them slowly through that. But the goal in the diabetes, and the semaglutide later was found to have a little more help for weight loss, but we didn't have any of that data at the time. We just, they gave us those samples and it was once a week. and that was easier than once a day. So we tended to pull that one out, and we would show them how to use it in the clinic. And most people tolerated 0.25, 0.5, but the goal was only to titrate it to the effect of helping their glucose. So as soon as they got some side effect, you backed off. And it helped. It helped quite a few, right? So it helped people lower insulin, come off insulin. Because if the trade-off, if you have 100 units of insulin versus semaglutide for cardiovascular risk, right, the more and more insulin, the more they're developing inflammatory visceral fat. They're getting sicker the more insulin. So if we can shift them to something non-insulin therapy, they start losing belly fat, lower insulin. You know that's a win. These are the highest risk people. So we were using them like that for probably 2-3 years. I don't think I ever had anyone above 1.0, which is 1.1 milligram. And then I never prescribed it, but at the same time, it got the FDA approval for weight loss. So semaglutide is Ozempic for diabetes, Wegovy for weight loss. Now most people don't realize it. The packaging is completely different in how they suggest you use it. So Wegovy, the maximum dose is they want you up to 2.4 milligrams a week. So the goal in the diabetes use of these meds, which I believe is a good use because it's probably financial risk benefit for cardiac prevention. You could make an argument that it's net harm, and financial burden, right? So where does this sit in the whole justice of healthcare? You could make a case for it. And then insurance companies covered it for diabetes. But the goal with the weight loss variety of it was amplify the dose to maximum side effect tolerance. So the goal in the diabetes approach was, 0.25, 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.4. And most people, like in my own experience, most people at 1, when we're using it for diabetes, before I even had a clue that what the strategy, I wasn't a weight loss doctor, right? I'm a diabetes doctor, right? At 1, most people were like, oh man, I can't tolerate 1. I just feel like shit. So you back them down to 0.5 and, maybe you'd stay there. But the strategy and how they are used is completely different. So diabetes drug, a little bit, glucose control, appetite control, low carb diet. We make GLP-1, Casey, not from injecting it. Our gut makes it, right? So GLP-1 is created in our gut, in our small intestine, primarily through proteins and non-starchy vegetables. So we make GLP-1, I think L cells or whatever, GLP, I think then the GIP is a different name of cell. But yeah, we make these hormones. So what we want to ultimately do with humans when we make them healthier is create homeostasis, right? We want them to actually make, it's like all the men now are coming in on tea, which is another whole terrifying thing, because when they have visceral fat and they don't sleep from their sleep apnea, they've crushed their tea. So now they get online and they call the tea doc, and I see horrible, super risky things here because no one follows them. Like today I had a guy whose hematocrit's 55, and if anyone listening knows what goodness. That is. Yeah, so no one follows them. They crank the T up, and the testosterone boosts red cells, and he had a blood clot, and he didn't understand why he had a blood clot. And he said, well, my T doctor wants me at 1200 T, and he didn't even realize that his blood count was like sludge. But that's happening all the time. But that's another podcast topic. Maybe is the downside of concierge testosterone therapy for the average American male now. It's oh my God.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Go ahead. Different with the GLP-1s. And then what was happening in a blog we did with Marianne Demasai, who's a brilliant investigative journalist. So we could share that one, she's a very good writer sharing the story. So toward the end of my time at my prior job, people were coming in because it was now starting to be used for weight loss. So they would be referred. That was a referral place mostly for diabetes, metabolic, maybe some obesity, medical obesity. But people were coming in and said, well, my doc says you prescribe those weight loss drugs. And I'm like, no, no, I'm not and they were healthy, right? Not all, but some they're healthy and they, have 5 pounds of subcutaneous adipose that their mother gifted them, which is not disease. And then I'm like, oh, I'm in the wrong place. This is not looking good, for what you go to work for, right? So you go to work to try to make people healthier. And I'm kind of glad now that I'm out of that world, because at the Veterans Administration, we don't use these weight loss drugs, right, without like multiple prior authorizations. So it's good news, is I can say, look, it's not even covered, so we're going to work on your diet. So like, that's good. Like, they're not coming in saying, well, my buddy got Wegovy or tirzepatide or Zepbound. So like, at first principle here, I'm encouraged not to use the drugs. So it's kind of like a last place of safety for doing the right thing, with the drugs. But there's, so many other layers to that story, and I think it's starting to become more clear now. So I'm also obesity medicine certified. So I took, the courses and took the board. So there is, for those listening, there's a subspecialty called obesity medicine, right? So just like cardiology, like we're trained to take care of obesity. Obesity is a disease. And, I took this curriculum in 2021, 2022. It takes a couple years, and you got to give them, a couple $1,000, to take the test and take their courses. And I knew it was kind of like every single speaker coming on at that time, in that course was the next generation. And they're all like cheerleaders for these drugs, right? This is the next generation of obesity. Obesity is a disease, next generation of management. And I'm just like, this doesn't sound right. Like, no one is talking about, they're talking about diet and exercise, just like in the last diet and exercise. Like, what specifically? But you have to take the curriculum, right? And even if you don't agree with it all, it's fine. It's good to listen and hear all opinions, right? And then you take the test, and the answer is always some medication. But then I think it's become more clear now, as the reporters are seeing what's happening. I think we shared that article a couple of days ago. It was in Reuters. So these thought leaders who teach that curriculum, it was like 25 million direct from pharma. And they're the thought leaders. So in healthcare, people are what are called thought leaders, right? They make the curricula. They're the people that give all the big conferences. People look to them. They go on 60 Minutes, like Fatima Cody Sanford, 60 Minutes. Obesity is a disease. Like, we have to treat this, forever. And actually, she had another editorial about how now, it's a human right that because they lose muscle mass, right? So she's advocating now that all the people on these meds, which is like everybody should be on these meds, or, it's a human rights issue if we don't give them the meds. But now we need to be paying for their DEXA scans because they lose muscle. It's like, wow. So now we're just escalating. We're giving, and then in the New York Times 2 weeks ago, Casey, you probably saw this one. So Big Pharma's next strategy is, because the muscle mass loss is real and it's legitimate, right? Especially in the elderly. So like, that's not a good trade-off where I'm losing 20 pounds, but people can look that up, right? So it's, we don't want frail people already to lose muscle. So now Big Pharma is trying to create drug antidotes for the muscle loss from
Oh my goodness.
the meds. Yeah, you're just like, it's dystopia. You're like, is this crazy? Right? It's crazy, but I hope people wake up. They're like, what is happening here? What is happening? And I mean, if everyone who's eligible for those medications were to get them, it's like 10% of our GDP, right? You're like,
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you're like, oh my goodness, 10% of our GDP is weight loss meds. And that's not even the DEXA scans. But yeah, I mean, anyone can look up, the gut paralysis, the extreme nausea. And in the studies, what people need to realize too is, like, you read the disclosures, and at the end of every article, it tells you how the articles were put together. So whether it was Surmount or STEP trials, these trials were funded, designed, written, submitted. Like, every single part of these studies was designed by pharma. And the authors are mostly ghost authors, who run weight loss clinics. But I'm just advocating for citizens, before you would be convinced these meds are good for you and humanity, read the conflicts of interest as well as the dropout rates. So when you see what happens in these, these are diabetes drugs, right? They're diabetes drugs. They help the bad diabetes patients. But when we're starting to, the big money is in weight loss with a different strategy. Crank the dose up to nausea. And then they lose weight. They don't like food. They lose muscle. They feel sick all the time, have a bad relationship with food, but they're losing weight. That's all good, right? To come back. And then they gain it all back. But the dropout rate is significant. So the people that remain in the trial are the ones who can tolerate the high dose. Everyone else washes out. And it's about 20%, I believe, in most of the trials. So they don't include the 20% who couldn't tolerate the dose. So they wash out. So they only include the people that could tolerate maximum nausea. And then as soon as they stop the med, right, they gain the weight right back. Because a number of also nefarious things might happen there. So Ben Bickman, our brilliant colleague, has shared about how the medications can change the architecture of the adipocytes. He's a fat cell guy. I just see patients. So if Ben says, I think this is true, I think it's true, because he's like in the lab looking at mice and stuff, and he's like super smart. So I like Ben. He's way smarter than you and I combined. Right? He's the guy.
That's fair.
There's no more question about insulin or insulin resistance. I'll email Ben. Give me your take. True, not true. Not true. I'm like, good. Now I got to go read some more literature. But what he says is, so these meds can shrink the adipocytes, right? So you're going to lose some weight, but the adipocytes can also multiply. So then you refeed. So you're so nauseated, you're so undernourished. Like, so why do these people regain the weight when you stop the drug? They're so undernourished. Like if I starved you for 3 months, you are undernourished. And now I let it's holding a beach ball underwater. Now I let it go, right? Your body is like, give me food. Right? That's a natural response. Anyone can look up the Minnesota starvation study if they want to terrify them what the effect of human starvation is on the human organism and what happens. Wild. Yeah, so we will not do that experiment again under IRB. Not we, but like humanity would never do that experiment again. And that was actually Ansel Keys, so that was one of his probably good contributions to outside the food pyramid, which we have to thank for Ansel Keys. He actually, the Minnesota starvation study is probably the most eloquent study of human starvation ever to be done, with well-meaning Mennonite young men who were willing to die for their country but didn't want to take up arms. I mean, they were willing to sign up for the starvation study. Most people are like, send me to war first, right? They're like, no, send me to Omaha Beach. Don't starve me. But there was this group of conscientious objectors. I mean, everyone should just watch that as just like what a gift of science that was, at the sacrifice of what happened to these people.
Absolutely. I'll link a podcast episode I listened to on, I want to say it was Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell, where he talks.
Oh, yeah, he talked about that.
Oh, man, it was really good. I learned a lot about it. I had a lot of like incorrect assumptions about how it was done and all that stuff. It was fascinating.
Yeah, and if Malcolm did a story on it, it's true master storytelling. So don't listen to me. Like, oh, yeah, thank you for, that was probably like 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I'll be sure to tag that in the notes. I'll also be sure to tag a lot of links that you sent me related to everything that you're talking about, like where the money came from, who is out promoting these things. I don't know. I think a lot of us, like who have been in the space for a while, tend to smell a rat when we see that pharma is coming up with some weight loss, whatever. Like if you lived through like the fen days or whatever, like crazy drugs that came out that had all kinds of side effects, they had to drop or pay out lawsuits or whatever. We're kind of like suspect of these things. And I want to go back to when you were prescribing this 4 or 5 years ago as a diabetes medication, not as a weight loss medication. I think that's so important to continue to clarify. How big of a drug was this for you? Was this like a game changer? Was this like, oh, this is nice, we'll add this, maybe it'll help by 10%? Like,
yeah, it was certainly not. We would reserve it for the ones who were struggling, right? So at least that was my practice, was at first do no farm, so you'd try to treat, I mean, you got to try to create homeostasis with food and nutrition and exercise and sleep and stress, right? So their life was a hot mess going through the pandemic and everything, right? Lost their job, kid moved back home, mother-in-law moved in, and they want to start a low-carb diet. Like, no, thank you. I mean, we saw people like and come back and after the pandemic or something. But no, it wasn't like a go-to because, we would have limited samples and, I would never write it. Now you couldn't get samples. Like they're a hot commodity. They had to lock it up. I mean, no shit. There's like, sorry to say that, but there's like, we had samples of Ozempic in an unlocked fridge in our clinic.
My goodness.
Oh my goodness, right? You're like, now
Yeah, but
you're like,
it's,
Ash. No, I'm serious. Like maybe there'd be like 8 starter kits like stacked up in there, and you had to sign them
wow.
out, sign the clipboard, and occasionally like once every couple months the rep would come through and restock it. So no, it was like, it wasn't quite a Hail Mary pass, but it was like, when okay, let's pull out this ace in the hole for the right patient who is struggling with, you know, appetite control, who we were trying to dial insulin down. Because if you can't dial insulin down, you'll never get them out of the condition, right? Hyperinsulinemia, right? Like Ben Bickman will say, resistance and hyperinsulinemia. So unless you can reverse the hyperinsulinemia, like they'll never be able to use fat for fuel, right? They feel tired all the time. Lactate builds up. We talked about that in the zone 2 talk, right? So you got to get them to normal human levels of insulin. And if the GLP-1 could help us get them from 200 units a day to 30 or 40, like at least get them in the land of the living, tended to be a net win, right? Because then they could start losing some weight and they'd feel better. Because they keep gaining weight, right? The diabetics looking for glucose control, they'll keep dialing the pen up, trying to get, so like option dial pen up or throw in semaglutide, right? I would pick semaglutide versus dialing the pen up. And I think anyone who deals with the physiology of diabetes would agree with that, if cost aside, right? Like if you're just looking at what's the best, I've got a basketball team now and I've got Mark Cuban, a limitless paycheck. Who do I want on my team? I'll take this semaglutide over here. It's like bringing in LeBron. But yeah, it was low dose, and we would teach them and pull it out. But I never wrote it straight out because of the side effect, right? You needed to do a lot of education. So I couldn't imagine now, like online, how these things are being used. Just put your credit card in, or you can go to Eli Lilly right now and get tirzepatide direct from Big Pharma, back to like sinisterism. Yeah, you can order the drugs now. They want to make it easier for you to get access to care, right? This is a human rights thing, right? We want to make it easier for you to get the appropriate care because it's hard for you to get medical care. So Eli Lilly will give you, if you have a credit card, talk to our online doc in 10 minutes, we'll send you tirzepatide. But you can be skeptical about that. And I'm skeptical because let's see what happens in 10 years. I think the sky will fall and, the conflicts of interest as well as massive side effects will start to become more apparent. You could type in Wegovy lawsuits, right? They're all over the place now, because yes, there's a lot of, there's Ozempic lawyers now, right, that are, but I think they can write the checks, like Purdue Pharma, right? There's enough people harmed, but they're making, it's basically Denmark's economy right now.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
let's time will tell. Like we use them appropriately. I'm not like this is a category of medications that have some utility, just like SGLT2 meds. I'm going to shut my door here. So ideally, the medications that make you urinate out glucose, they have a role, and I think they are helpful in many situations. Because so many people who have type 2 diabetes, we can kind of use the term like they are overfilled, right? They're glucose toxic. They're overfilled. Their adipocytes are overfilled. Their muscles are overfilled. Their liver's overfilled. And if they go on low carb and they can use the SGLT2s to kind of kind of dump out a little bit, as long as they're making insulin so they don't have euglycemic DKA, that can be a net positive. But it wouldn't be like the first thing foundationally, type 2 diabetes is a dietary syndrome of an individual's inability to tolerate carbohydrates, right? So as long as foundationally we all agree on that as our treatment, the meds can be pulled out. We did an article on med reduction, 2-3 years ago. We published it in Frontiers, which has, I think most of that is still pretty spot on as far as nothing new under the sun has happened since that article about how most of us practice medicine with diabetes and medications when we use them.
Yeah, very interesting. You've talked about this a little bit, and this is now a podcast I listened to a year ago. Somebody sent it to me. I've listened to it like 5 or 6 times because I just can't believe the disconnect. It was the daily podcast at New York Times, I believe, and they were interviewing an obesity expert, especially when it comes to pediatrics and kids. And she explained that we're having a huge obesity problem. It's genetic. It's a big problem. We've studied this in schools. We told one school to do the right things, and the other school not, and we saw no difference. So we need to attack this now and get on top of this. And so we're recommending, that kids can start to qualify for nutritional counseling at age 2. They can qualify for some of these medications to be prescribed at age 12, and they can prescribe bariatric treatment. So actually cutting and changing the digestive system forever, irreversibly at age 13. And now they're considering doing those things younger and younger. Even I believe it's being tested, some of these medications being tested on 6-year-olds. So that doesn't sound great. What scares you about that?
Oh gosh, so everything. So talk to me in 2 months. So I submitted a paper with my colleague James Bales, Jenny Favret, Nina Padu Jenny Favret's at Duke, and Nina Padu at Vanderbilt. So it's been about 6 months in the pipeline, 10,000 word article, for publication on insulin resistance in children and low carbohydrate approach. So that is like a huge, so submitted, sent this weekend, final edits. Now it just needs to be, I think it will be accepted because we've gone through enough rounds of edits. So, oh gosh, no, that should not be first principle. A lifetime sentence of GLP-1s for a 12-year-old is not first principle. So first principle. So, I think you heard this on the Callie Means and Tucker Carlson, right? If a fish, is struggling, we don't medicate the fish. We clean the tank. So right now the kids, our concluding thought on this article, the toxic food environment is creating the problem. And you can't, like, if one kid, I've got children, they're in college now, but if they're in middle school and one kid out of 30 is failing the test, there's probably some learning issue with that child, right, Casey? But if 2/3, 3/4 of the kids are failing the test, there's something more systemic. Jeff Volek and I put an article in The Hill a few months ago on the national security crisis, which is obesity. 3 out of 4 high school kids aren't eligible to enlist. You're like, whoa, like, can you blame the kids? Like, no, there's something like this, but we have all that in the article, trimmed down to 10,000 words. It's a lot. It's like, this was probably the most heavy lift article that ever, like, somehow got volunteered to write. And that's like, okay, I'll go ahead and do that. And then you're like, you start it and you're like, oh man, but it's a disruptive topic. So like these, talking about these things, navigating the published medical literature press is not easy. So if anyone listening thinks all these articles are like easy to get, it's like, no, this editor doesn't. I've had multiple things rejected by like editor number 3. Like the rest of them, like, and they just flat out reject. And you're like, but that's how peer review is done. Like, who's your peer? And the peer review is actually like pretty distorted on the other side. Like, who peer reviews most of the stuff that gets published in the medical literature? Like, the peer review process is flawed. Like, people who are, basically on the same team for pharma will peer review surmount step trials. And of course, approved, right? Their conflicts of interest of the peer reviewers. We don't see the conflicts of interest on who approves and disapproves the articles. You're like, no, this is sinister. This is dark.
I can't even.
No, but I'm an optimist. Like, it's all pretty dark, but we're going to get this paper through the pipeline, and then you can share it with your audience. But it's all no. We have to fix the pond. We have to fix the water. We have to fix the environment. If the flower is wilting and other flowers are wilting, you fix the soil.
Yep.
Work upstream. But the kids are harder. So we did we finished a study in kids. We're trying to wrap up, but you learn a lot. So what we learned from the kids is it's crazy. Like the kids respond to low carb, they lose the weight. But do you think they can stay on it for a year in the normal environment they live? They're kids, right? They're controlled only by their emotions and their environment. It's sad. Like I interviewed post study one of our kids last weekend. Oh, when you were on the diet, how'd you do? I lost 25 pounds, feeling good. And then, I started eating school lunch again, hanging out with my friends. It's hard, right? It works when you do it. But the problem is, like, it's easy not to be a smoker now. I mean, I'm 57. I mean, we had a smoking lounge in my high school, right? So like now, like you can't even, like, you'd have to go across town to smoke. But yet we feed them the most toxic stuff for free on Title IX free school lunch. That's another political
It's
discussion.
terrible.
Yeah, it's
That's
dark,
terrible.
but there is a way out. Take
Yep.
ownership of your own health. That's my way out.
And it's so apparent too. You talk to the parents out there who themselves found low carbohydrate. They're doing it themselves, so they start feeding their kids that way, and it's fine. Like the kids have an adjustment period, just like an adult would, but they do it, and I submit that the kids like it better. They feel better. They do better in school. Their athletics are better. Their skin clears up. They lose whatever baby fat they might still have. Like they tend to do really well. And so I guess I would just really want to wrap up this conversation by exactly what you do best, which is providing hope. Let's say there's somebody out there that listen to all of this rigmarole about these drugs and procedures and all this stuff to lose weight. If we go back a few years, these drugs didn't exist. They weren't prescribed for weight loss. What are the key core principles that can still help anybody walking away from this conversation? What things can they change? What can they eat? What should they avoid? Any other lifestyle practices you recommend so that they may never have to experience any of the effects of these drugs?
Yeah, I mean, it's keep it simple, right? I mean, we all talk about these pillars, so if you're insulin resistant, which almost all people with medical obesity are, right? Not people who want to fit in their prom dress or something. Yeah, so if you're hyperinsulinemic, insulin resistance, carbohydrate reduction, that's the wheelhouse, right? So food, nutrient dense, low carbohydrate eating. So I'm going to close this. Yeah, and exercise is for your brain, right? You're an exercise guy, Casey. So it's not to burn calories, but when people exercise, they sleep better, they're stressed, right? So the treatment for trauma, big T trauma, is somatic therapy, right? Of the body. Exercise is the therapy for trauma. So exercise for your brain, to help you sleep, to help your mood, community. If your sleep is bad, gosh, treat your sleep, treat your stress. But the quicker we catch this, when we catch people 20 years too late, oh gosh, it's hard, right? Because now they're just so immobile from their disease and they're depressed and, they're on all these medicines and they can't make energy from fat. Like they feel tired. They can't exercise because they get acidotic. So the sooner you initiate these things, the better, but give them hope, right? Not despair. Everyone who comes in, look, I know you can get out of this situation. Do you think you can get out of this situation? And then you shut up, right? Well, yeah, doc. Like the guy this morning, that's how we ended. You think, I think you can get out of this situation. And I know you can get out and we can help you. What do you think? You think you can get out of this situation? And he's like, heck yeah. But if they just think it's despair, right? Oh, you're going to be diabetic. It's chronic or progressive disease. You got to go see the eye doc, the dietitian, the pharmacist, shoot insulin 5 times a day, check your sugar 4 times a day. We need to get your kidneys checked. You need this, that. Like they walk out and they're like, whoa. And then we say, well, they're non-compliant. But it goes back to, the podcast we talked about, like with compassion. Like, so what is that? So empathy is, man, if it were you, Casey, it sucks to be you. You got diabetes, go to fill your pills. I understand your situation, but compassion is we will get in the well with you. We will do everything we can to help you. And people think, oh, that's a lot of work. But in the end of the day, it really isn't, because they get better and then they don't need you anymore. But if you don't do that, then I don't know. Yeah. So get in the well with people, and that's why, like, Mariella talk, that's what brings you joy. Like you hear the excitement, like she likes going to work because she sees people get better. And that's like, wow, that's, as much as, after this call, I've got to go clear my electronic medical record, but that's okay, right? That's just what it is, right? But like, I'm excited to go to work tomorrow. It's a great group of people here. They're combat veterans. I'm a veteran, and they can get better. And these people deserve, right? Like there's a fork in the road, right? So they don't know. They're like, oh, I got this disease, on meds my whole life. I guess that's the way it is, right? You can get better. You want to know about that? Well, sure, doc. Tell me about that. Well, you like meat. Yeah, I like meat, right? So yeah, you can get better. You could do that. So, but back to, like, what is it that you listening have to wake up to? I mean, I think most of us have woken up to the command control and a lot of the sinister stuff that happened during the pandemic, right? I think every human rights, medical ethics, I mean, you could look up the medical ethics violations that happened during that, autonomy, meaning right of refusal, informed consent, beneficence, malfeasance, justice, so like we have to look at what we do in that concept, in that scope. But, who is controlling the medical narrative now? Who controls healthcare in America? It's the medical industrial complex and pharma, right? They're controlling the narrative, right? Thought leaders, funding. You're like, you wake up and then who feeds us in this country? You've interviewed all these people, right? Big ag, big food, they feed us. Do either of those entities care about your health, or do they just want you under their control? Yeah, they want you under their control. So who has to be in control? You have to be in control. And I mean, I think the people I deal with appreciate that, right? These are folks who went down range, right? So they have a lot of pride, right? They want to be, but then they kind of look at what's happened and say, go downstairs to the pharmacy and look at all these people picking stuff up. They don't, most of them don't know what's going on, right? They haven't really been drilled down why they need these medicines, right? They just think this is the way it is, and they get good care. I mean, but I think, we don't train the medical people that there's a way out. Our industry is mostly trained by industry standards of care, which are run by thought leaders who are all, funded by pharma. So people just need to know there's a way out, right? If they want to line up and get all the pills, that's fine. But if they don't know, if no one's ever sat down with them and said, no, it doesn't have to be that way, then that's on us as clinicians, and that's on us, right? We, with that autonomy, right? They need to know their options, right of refusal. I don't want meds. What is there another way to do this? So it's one of our tenets of medical ethics. It's autonomy. So we respect that with every patient. Do no harm, only do good. Make sure they're informed of every decision that they can make. So I hope I didn't ramble through that one, but that's kind of the summary of it. Ask questions if you're out there listening. I think people have just thought like it's this day of what the doctor says. My doctor put me on a medicine. Always ask questions. Why do people listen to all these podcasts, right? So they're looking for information. Like your show's great, Casey. So why, million downloads of all your shows, so like they want information that they're not getting somewhere. So I think, that's why I think podcasts are great, because people go find legitimate shows with people that are actually doing unfunded medical work. And that makes sense. It doesn't, then they go try it. Don't listen to this and trust everything I just said, right? Go read and try to verify.
Yeah. Well, you're pushing this work forward in such an awesome way. And I love that compassion is such a big part of your message. And it definitely shows through with all the work that you do and that everybody that we talk to at your running store says about you, like just everybody. I don't know. You seem like a great example of somebody to follow in the field, regardless of whether you're in healthcare or not, to increase our compassion with people, especially as it relates to metabolic disease and just understanding the fact that, people are making a lot of money on a really bad situation. That's the reality, but it is empowering and it is hopeful, like you said, to be able to understand that you can take this under control. And I would submit you can do it in a way that it might take some time and it might be a little bit difficult in the beginning, but over time it will be inexpensive, be very easy, very practical, and you will really, really enjoy it. And the ways that your life will pay you back is just absolutely incredible. And it's been awesome to have you on the show, Dr. Cucuzzella. I really love all the time that we get to chat. I love that we've been able to meet in person several times at lots of different shows. It's always awesome. Always awesome to chat with you. It's great.
You're doing great work. I appreciate it's a privilege to be on your show, and to be back for like the fourth time, so this is, I'd forgotten how many times we've been on, but let's follow up when we get the pediatric article, and we could just kind of discuss
Excellent.
that, hopefully not too much longer. It's good. All right,
excellent.
Good luck with your hockey playing.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much. Yeah, nothing too serious anymore, but it's fun to go out and skate. And thank you so much for the kind words.
Well, right? It keeps you happy, bang it up a little bit.
I sure love it. If for nothing else, just to go talk smack with some of my boys, you know what I mean? It's just totally fine. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work, Mark?
So I'm not really on social media. So I do have a website, drmarksdesk.com. And if you're out here in West Virginia, come visit our running store. We actually do stuff with lifestyle and nutrition out of my running store. So it's in Ranson, West Virginia, and we host races. So we host, if you like to do running races, we have freedomsrun.org. We can link that. So we have a half marathon, 5K in May 18th, and another run in the fall. And that's that community stuff that's fun, right? Like getting out there and having nothing to do with all this diabetes world, and you can get out there and like lift cones and set up races. So that's my community. I like doing that stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, we
at our store, and that's a good time. We'll get the minimal shoes, right? So we'll
exactly.
fix the shoes. You know, most people's feet are as broken as their metabolism, so we can help you with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, the customer service is always amazing, and that you guys are active and participating in the community.
Being a customer from Utah, you know.
Yeah, that's us. We love it.
Get some Lone Peak boots for the snow. They've got a new waterproof boot.
That exactly. I did a hike just this last weekend. My wife and I went out to a hot springs, and the whole thing was on ice. And I was really surprised that my Earth Runner sandals actually were grippy enough to like hold the trail pretty well. But yeah, we've done Vivos with you guys and done online fittings, which has been fantastic. So I can't say enough about your store. It's great.
All right. Well, good. Have to keep doing good work. We'll catch up soon, Casey.
Absolutely. That sounds great. And same to you. Thank you so very much for everything that you do. And thank you for taking the time to appear on our show today. We really appreciate you. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.